What is going on, guys? Welcome back to part 2 of the Instagram app series. In the last part, we went over some basic project setup and some ground rules. And in this part, we're going to be continuing where we left off. And we're going to set up Firebase, possibly start talking about login and registration and all that good stuff. So we're going to actually begin by opening up the project folder and opening up this pod file that we created towards the end of the last video. And basically in here, we're going to bring in some dependencies for the things that we're going to use in this project. So the first one we're going to bring in is something called the apparator. And apparator basically allows us to show a app rating prompt. Then we're going to bring in a bunch of Firebase pods. And if you're not familiar with Firebase, Firebase is what we're going to be using for our database, our login, registration, all that good stuff. Analytics, and basically all of our backend services. So you're going to want to bring in Firebase Core and a few more. We're going to want Firebase Auth, database, and analytics. And I also think we're going to bring in Crashlytics, which is a part of Firebase that, as the name implies, helps you track any crashes that are experienced by your users in your app. So we might want to use other frameworks later on, but let's get started with just these for now, and then we'll revisit this as we need things as we continue to build the app. So go ahead and do Command Q on text edits, and we are going to open up Terminal and cd into that project folder, which is on my desktop. And now what you can do is run pod install. And let me expand this a little bit so we can see it a little better. And it's going to start going through all of the pods that we put in that file, as well as any of the internal dependencies, and it's going to start installing all of them. So give it probably something around like 30 seconds. If you don't have Cocoapods installed in your machine and your terminal says that it can't find the pod command, just go ahead and Google how to install Cocoapods on your Mac. It's very, very simple. You'll find a bunch of Google tutorials, and it's like two commands you have to run. But give this a few seconds. And actually, while it's doing this, in a browser, you want to go ahead and open up firebase.com and sign in with your Google account. And you'll come to the console like the one you see here. And we're going to want to create a new project here. And go ahead and name your project. I'm going to name it Instagram. We're going to continue. It's going to ask us to agree to a bunch of things. We're going to pretend like we read it and continue. And here it wants us to give it a analytics account for Google Analytics. We'll pick the default one and continue. And now it's setting some stuff up for us. Cocoapods is still chugging along over here. Bear with it. So Firebase is super handy for these types of video series, and also kind of when you're building your own apps, you don't have to write out the backend API services yourself. For larger projects, maybe I'll do some videos of how to do that in Python or PHP, but that's a little out of scope for just kind of iOS stuff. So it looks like this is done over here, so we can continue. And now that we have the project created, we want to add an iOS app. So we're going to click on that. And the first thing that it asks for us is the bundle ID. And it looks like this is done over here, so we can open up Xcode and get the bundle ID. So you want to do open, project name, and now that we ran pod install, we should have a XC workspace. And from now on moving forward, we're going to always use the workspace as it's going to have all of our dependencies installed. So once Xcode opens up, we can grab that bundle ID by selecting the blue project folder here. And the bundle ID is this guy right here. So let's come over here and paste it in. And we want to give it a name and a ID. Apparently they're optional, so we're going to be lazy and skip them. And now it should give us a file to download, which is going to be our configuration file. So we're going to download that. And we're going to bring that into our project in just a second. Let's hit next. Now it's just telling you to install the dependencies and stuff. So let's open up our project here. Let me expand this a little bit. And let's drag in that Google Services file that we just downloaded from Firebase right there. Make sure this is checked to copy it, as well as the target membership here. And I know my computer fan's about to get super loud, so I apologize for that. And let's also open up the app delegate. And we want to start in here by importing Firebase. And an application did finish launching. We're going to make some space and we're going to say Firebase app.configure. And what you want to do now is over here, the spinner is basically waiting for our app to connect to Firebase. So we want to run the app in a simulator. So go ahead and pick a simulator in here. I'm going to stick with the 11 Pro Max. Let's hit that run button. Now compiling might take a little longer because we just brought in a bunch of new code via these dependencies. Let's go ahead and close terminal as well as this Finder window. And let me also expand this. But let this compile over here and it should launch the simulator. And once Firebase detects everything is connected, you'll see a check mark pop up over here. And let me close this download panel. So the cool thing about this is once all of Firebase is set up, most of it is good to go. And we need to do very minimal setup to continue. So let this compile. And while this is going, let's open up our controller, other, and we're going to want onboarding. So we're going to start with login and registration in the beginning. Looks like our app just launched. We should see our tabs here. So it's still in the launch process. There we go. If your app crashes at this point, that means one of two things. Either your Google services file is not present in the app, or for some reason, it can't be found in your project. So that's why it'll crash at this point if it does for you. But give this a couple seconds. Sometimes Firebase likes to be annoying and take a little longer than usual. Shouldn't be more than a few minutes tops. I like to close the app and reopen it 1 or 2 times. That tends to help. Bear with it. And also, like I mentioned in the last video, I'm going to keep this one around 20 minutes or sub 20 minutes as video, just so it's more digestible for all of you guys. There it goes. Okay, perfect. Check mark. So now we can hit this to continue, and we've got Firebase set up. So what do we want to do now? Well, the first thing we want to do is we're going to be talking about registration and login and all that good stuff. So let's go to our login controller and get rid of this. And let's also get rid of that on registration. And we're going to first set up email and password authentication. I haven't decided yet. We might add Facebook authentication as well, seeing that this is Instagram and the normal Instagram app allows for it. But let's go to Firebase, and under develop, you want to hit authentication. And we want to enable authentication. So click on sign in methods. And we want to turn the switch on for email and password. So click on this and it will open it up. And you see there are 2 switches here. And the first one that we want, or the one that we want to turn on, is this one. So this switch down here is for an email link. So it's passwordless sign in. We're not going to deal with that now, maybe in the next video. But go ahead and hit save. And we should be good to go for creating accounts and logging in. So right now when we launch the app, we present the user to the 5 main tabs. Now we only want to show the user these tabs in this view, this tab bar controller, if the user has authenticated. So we have 2 choices. Either we can launch the app to the login controller by default, and if the user is already authenticated, we can present this view. Or the alternate, which is we can present this by default, check if the user is not signed in, and present login. And we're going to go with that latter approach. And my reasoning is that once you're signed in, people don't tend to log out that often. So it's a faster experience for the user to come here by default rather than going through login every single time. The view controller switch adds about a second to the boot time. So that's how we're going to do that. I just wanted to call that out from the get-go before somebody asks in the comments. So let's do that. So the first controller that's launched by default is the home view controller. So here what we're going to do is we are going to override view did appear. And then here we're going to say check auth status. So how are we going to check the auth status? So the simplest approach is by checking if there is a Firebase authentication session. So we can start in here by saying import Firebase auth. And what we can do is we can say if, I believe it's Firebase auth dot auth, might be FIR auth, let's see. It's just auth. If auth.auth.current user equals nil, then we want to show login. Otherwise, we don't really want to do anything. So we can leave it as such for now. The other thing that I'll call out right now in the earlier parts of this series is I'm going to probably open up the Google Firebase documentation for a reference. I encourage you guys to do the same as well. I highly kind of preach, don't try to memorize everything. Using docs is perfectly okay, and you should use them to your advantage. So let's actually create a separate function to do this. So we're going to say func handle auth handle not authenticated. And here we're going to say handle not authenticated. And basically, if the user is not authenticated, what we're going to do is we are going to create the login controller, which is going to be login view controller. And we're simply going to present the login VC. Animated, we're going to say false. And then we're also going to say login VC. Presentation, modal presentation style. And we're going to make this full screen. That way the user can't swipe it away. And the other thing I'll do is if we go to that login controller, let's also make this a folder called general. If we go to that login controller, let's set a background color to it just so we can see it. Like that. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And once we launch, we should go to that red screen right away because there shouldn't be a user signed in. So let's see that one more time. It's a little fast. So we launch and right away it goes to that red screen because there's no user signed in. And of course, we need to have an authenticated user to show the actual app experience. So basically on this screen, we're going to have a logo, the header basically, a login field. So the login field is going to be either email or username, or a email username and a password. And below that, we're going to have a create account button. And maybe at the bottom, we'll have like a privacy policy and a terms of service button as well, since those are pretty important. So before we actually do that, let's talk about how we're going to manage all of our service calls here to Firebase. So one approach is you can just put that code inside your view controllers, and that's not really a great approach. The reasoning it's not a great approach is because your code is kind of all over the place. Your view controllers will get large. It's easy to get duplicate code. So what we're going to do instead is we are going to create dedicated objects that will manage all of that stuff for us. So for example, for anything related to the database, we're going to create an object. And let me actually create it as a Swift file rather than a class. So let's do new file. It'll be a Swift file. And we're going to create a class that is called Database Manager. And as the name implies, this is going to manage everything to our database. So here we are going to just import Firebase database. It's going to be a public class called Database Manager. And we're going to have one single instance of it. So we want to create a shared static constant in here, and that's going to equal a database manager. And we're going to add basically public APIs to this, or a public functions that anyone in the app could use to basically do things. So for example, we might want to have, rather we will want to have a function which is going to say, so we're going to say public func register new user with, let's say, username email and a password, like so. And we might want to have another function, which is something like public func login user. And this is going to be username, optional because the user might provide the username or the email. Email, password, so on and so forth. So the idea is basically we're going to have one object where all of this code is going to reside rather than putting all of this stuff all over the place. So whenever you want to debug any issue relating to the database, you can come here and do it. And it looks like we have an issue in here. What's the issue? Undeclared string. This should be lowercase. That'll go away. So that's the database. Similarly, we're going to have other objects for other things that we are going to want to do. So for example, this is actually the database manager. So I don't really know if we should have the registration and login in here. Now that I think about it, we might want to create another manager for that. So let me actually create another file and call this auth manager. And maybe we want to put all the authentication stuff in here because technically we're going to use the database to figure out if a user exists, but we might want to keep that separate. So I'm going to copy and paste that and quickly change this to be auth manager. And we're going to say login and register there. And let's get rid of this stuff here. And we are going to want one more. The next one is going to be storage manager. So whenever the user uploads a photo or a video, we need to store it somewhere in the cloud on Firebase. We're going to say storage manager. Once again, let's copy and paste this. And we also are going to want to import in the auth manager Firebase auth. And let's paste that here. And here we're going to want to import Firebase storage. And looks like I didn't bring it in via Cocoapods. So let's actually do that really fast. So open up terminal. And we're already in our project. Actually, no, we're not. So cd into your project and do a open pod file. And we're going to want to bring in Firebase storage, which is going to be the framework that lets us upload and download things from a Firebase storage bucket. So put that there and run pod install. Whoops, let's type it in correctly, pod install. And it should add what you need for Firebase storage, like so. Should be fairly quicker this time. We're only installing one thing. So bear with it a few seconds. There it goes. All right, it finished up. So now we should be able to import Firebase storage. Sometimes the autocomplete doesn't work. There it goes, Firebase storage. So now we have that here. Let's rename this storage manager. And let's hit Command B to compile. Make sure everything is still compiling. Hopefully shouldn't have any issues. All right, bear with it a few seconds. All right, cool, it's compiling. If we hit Command R, we should still be on that red screen because there's still no user, perfect. And I think on the next video, we'll probably design the actual login screen. So like I mentioned, on the login screen, we're going to want to have two text fields for the username and password. The first field will also be capable of taking the email. So the user has the option of email or password or username or password. We're going to want a header up here with the Instagram logo, a login button, and privacy policy and terms here. So let's actually stub out some of that code we're going to want to write in the next video. So we're going to do this UI totally programmatically. So let's start creating some of the things we're going to want. So we're going to want a username email field, and this is going to be a UI text field. So I'm just going to stub them out right now, and I'm not going to configure everything. So we're going to want that. We're going to want a password field. And let me just do this before I forget. So it's secure text entry true, which is going to make the field not show the actual character, but show the asterisks. We're gonna want a, what else do we want? We're gonna want a login button. So we're gonna say login button, and this is gonna be a UI button. We're also gonna want, what else do we want? We're also gonna want a header view, which is just gonna be a simple UI view, returning a UI view. And we're also gonna want basically a login, or sorry, a privacy policy and a terms of service button. So I'm just gonna copy and paste this, and we're gonna change the name. So this is gonna be a terms button, and this is gonna be a privacy button. So these are basically all the views we're gonna want. And we are going to say add subviews. Let's create that function. And let's go ahead and add all those subviews. So we've got 2 fields, 3 buttons, and 1 header view. So this is gonna be the username field. Let me just copy and paste that a few times. Password, login, terms, privacy, header. So it's a total of 6, which is I think how many we have here. And so this actually adds all the subviews. We don't want red as the background. We want the background here to be primary. Actually, I think they call it system background, which is the primary system background color based on dark mode. We are going to want to override view did layout subviews. And basically here, we're gonna assign frames in the next video to all of this. We're gonna want functions that get called when the 3 buttons are tapped. So let's create those really fast. They need to be marked Objective-C so they can be exposed to the buttons. So the first one's gonna be did tap login button, did tap terms button, did tap privacy button. And I just realized we also want a create account button. Did tap create account button. And let's put line breaks there. And let me create one more button for that new user create account flow. And this is going to be create account button. And let's make sure we add this as a subview like so. So let's see, why is this complaining? System background, add subviews. We should put parentheses here so we can call the function, hit Command B. If you run it, you won't actually see anything because we haven't assigned any frames. You will notice that it's now not red anymore. It's the system background, which we're in light mode, so it's white. Pro tip, if you hit Command-Shift-A, your simulator changes into the other modes, so dark mode, light mode. So as we go along and build this, we're gonna make sure our app looks awesome in light mode as well as dark mode. So that said, this video's gone a little over 20 minutes, so I'm gonna keep my promise and wrap it up here. As always, I'm gonna commit this and push it up to Git. And in the next part, hopefully we can get through making the login screen as well as hooking it up here to log in a user as well as register a user. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't destroyed that like button, as always, make sure to do so. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and haven't done so already. Comment with questions, errors, anything you might want to share. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in part 3.